Hello everyone, my name is Kruv. Welcome back, and if you're new here, welcome for the very first time. I hope you're having a wonderful day. Thank you so much for clicking on this video. Today, you might have guessed from the thumbnail and or title that I'm going to be discussing the skill effects in this game. The skill effects, the culling, animations, all that jazz. Now before I start, I want to preface this video by saying Guild Wars 2 has come a long way in its skill culling and its history with skill effects and animations. It's come a long way. In my opinion, it used to be much, much worse, and they've made strides, but I still think that there is room for improvement and some errors that just continue to pop up, and or recent changes, or relatively recent changes, which I think were probably worse for the visual health of the game. So I have a couple of bulleted notes for myself, but this is kind of gonna be like podcasty, so I hope you don't mind that. I do have some structure, but let's jump right in. With one of my first points, I'll be tackling the actual size of effects and give my opinions. So in other games, I've noticed that their animations and skill effects are much larger and grandiose, and I'm not sure why, but my brain reads that as being more readable, and I can understand a fight when abilities and skills are typically a bit larger and more defined. In Guild Wars 2, I have felt that their skill culling, as it has been improved, there's still something missing to where so many skills are being shown on screen, but at such a small size. And to me, that ends up almost having like a quote-unquote swarm-like effect, just a swarm of skills. Now, if you imagine this swarm like a locust swarm, when you're looking at it, there's just a bunch of little particles and not a lot of detail. It's kind of like pixelated and blurry and fuzzy, and I'm like, what am I looking at right now? So in terms of the size, I think Guild Wars 2 could probably benefit from having larger skill effects. They used to have larger skill effects back in the alphas and betas and early live version of Guild Wars 2 back in 2012. And it was really impactful and felt great. For the satisfaction of having larger skills, but also for the readability. It did get muddy when you got a lot of people together, but I'm not saying to get rid of culling entirely. I'm saying bring back larger skills for some skills, but also improve on the culling effects. Now, I'll touch on that in a couple points. But my next point, aside from the size of the actual skills and animations to where you, the player character, could see yourself doing things, I think that another issue with skills is in fact the coloring of the skills. In my opinion, Guild Wars 2 is a very bright game. A very bright game in terms of its setting and its landscape. Very bright, vibrant colors. And it's great and all, but when you have a bright background that you're playing in, and the skills are equally as bright, it just becomes a bright fest. It's just kind of blinding. Now, if Guild Wars 2's background, like its coloring of its settings were a bit darker and its skills were brighter, you'd have that contrast to better see skills. But that isn't the case. Right now, it's just bright colors on top of bright colors. And I think it'd probably be better, because they don't want to change the landscape, if instead of making the landscape and the surroundings darker, just to tweak the coloring of the skill effects. If you notice, the core of many spell effects and magical abilities, it's a lot of very bright white color in the middle, which gradiates, I hope I use that word right, to a darker color on the outside, which is cool for some abilities, but when it's every ability, you're like, everything is just blinding. There's a whole lot of white flashes, very, very light yellows and blues. It's just sometimes too much, and it becomes very homogeneous when you want to have differentiated spell effects. Like, for example, like the Scourge Sand Shades, the very core of it is like a blinding white yellow light, when it could have just been a very dull, musky yellow outlined with darker colors to better fit the Necromancer theme and to help with skill effects and the definition. So that is, of course, my opinion. And I'm no expert on this. It's just kind of like what I'm taking as logical steps, like bright on bright, a lot of bright colors, not as much darker color definitions. So when taken into consideration everything I've said, my solution would be to go back and darken up some spell effects, especially the fire effects. For like Fire Elementalist or Flamethrower Engineer, give them a bit darker of hues and outline them when necessary with darker colors just to better differentiate them. And it will offer more concrete and blocked off boundaries for effects, so it's not to the point where everything just looks like it's meshing and melting together. So that's my opinion on the coloring of effects, which this video could have so many different nuances, but I'm trying to keep them somewhat broad. I'll pop on examples when I need to. Moving on to my next point, which I might have touched on previously in my first point. I kind of like diverged a little bit. But I still believe there should be more options to emphasize the player character's effects to make them more satisfying to use. Like if you look back at some effects, like I saw on Reddit recently someone saying, let's get the old Phoenix skill animation back. It looked so satisfying to use, and it really elevated the combat to a different level, which is why I was very intrigued in Guild Wars 2 in the first place. But over the years, everything's just kind of been like, meh. It still looks good and is fun, but I think animation is also a very important key aspect. And if you spend days, months, years working on animations and skill effects, you should be proud of that. No reason to mute it. And additionally, not for the satisfaction, but to understand what the player character is doing and casting. Sometimes I'm in these large Zergs. I completely even forgot about World versus World. That's like a main game mode where there's constant Zergs. I was just in the mindset of world bosses, but yeah, World versus World could also use this too, I guess. But player characters, sometimes when I'm out in a Zerg or a world boss farm, I tend to wonder, what am I doing? What am I actually casting? Are any of my abilities actually landing? Because I can't see anything. And I think that's a major detriment to combat, and shouldn't. Well, I don't want to say shouldn't, but it should be a goal to not run into that issue. Of course, there will, of course, be a cap at some point where there's just so many effects on screen where you can't see anything, especially if you get a full 250 people in a map doing it. But on average, it should be still understandable what the player character is doing. In that same vein, there should be more options to reduce the effects of every other character around you. And I know I said be very proud of those skill effects, and you should be proud, but you should also give the option to completely demolish, reduce, and make ineffective every other player character's spell effects that's on your team. Now in PvP, you would want to see what your enemy players are casting and stuff. So, but I think for allied characters, you should definitely be like, oh, that giant lava font, oh, that giant healing rain, that hollow smith prime light beam with a lot of blinding white light, that should just not really be a thing. That should just like be taken down. So I would also like options for you to enhance the player character to get a sense of what yourself you are doing, and also to reduce the effects of people around you. Now, let me talk about, in my opinion, one of the most egregious, one of the most heinous offenders of the visual effects bloat in Guild Wars 2. And this was a more recent change. This is the skill and AoE rings. The combo field rings. I had always felt that something was off about the visuals of Guild Wars 2, and it wasn't until I played back some footage and was recording and editing when I realized the ground looks like a 70s, 80s acid trip vomited all over the floor, and it is an eyesore. It is truly, in my opinion, one of the worst things to affect the visual aspect of Guild Wars 2. And I think that they could improve it, and I think that there is a way to fix it. It's weird because this change might also affect balance. Reduce combo fields, like take some combo fields off of some skills, which would definitely affect balance. But I could also see that making combo fields a little bit more desirable and special. It just feels like there are so many combo fields of so many types being thrown out into boss battles, raids, PvP, world bosses, world versus world, that you can't directly target a certain field and be like, oh, that's a fire field. You might see a fire field ring, but that could also be an ice field, a water field, a smoke field, a dark field, a poison field. It could literally be any field. So I think the fields are overall just a really poor implementation in terms of coloring. And I don't want it to sound harsh. I'm just giving my honest opinion, and I think this is at the highest thing, the pinnacle of what I think is negatively affecting the animations. Because I do think Guild Wars 2 looks beautiful, and then it's just like, there's so many AoE effects. No, so many AoE ring effects. With colored ring effects. Now, you can have AoEs, but I don't think some AoEs necessarily need to have those like bright visual colored lights popping out from the ground to show you that it's a combo field. I don't think that's needed. I think the animation should speak for itself. Ugh, that was my rant on the rings. Every time I go into a world boss or even a raid, I'm just like, please not let there be so many rings, and that's just a wish that will never come true. So yeah, that was my little spiel on the animations. Bonus round for just clutter and culling. I would like to have options to cull mini pets and player infusions and auras, just because I think those are unnecessary bloats, especially in raids. Like, get rid of your mini pets. Hey, get rid of your mini pets as a courtesy, because it's not an option right now, but I think it also should be an option. On top of the options to, like, help you to cull player backpacks. Some of these backpacks are massive. The World vs. World backpack, that thing is huge. Fire effects, smoke and all. And then there's other, like, wing backpacks where you're just like, really? You're taking up half of my screen. Can you please turn it off? We're in a raid. We're killing Kadim. I can't see. My FPS is literally at 10, thanks to you. So I think there could be more options to just better optimize and streamline the game, but also give you that satisfaction. This video might be useless, but maybe someone will hear it and say, I heard it. You don't have to do anything, just so you might acknowledge it. I don't know what I'm doing with my life. Anyway, thank you everyone for coming to my little TED Talk about spell effects, animations, colors, AoE rings, and culling. Like the video if you liked it. Comment down below your thoughts on this whole debacle, this whole heated spiel. And yeah, I'll catch you guys in the next video. Subscribe. Love you guys. Bye. Down below, I have links to all things Guild Wars 2 for free-to-play players and expansion players alike. So if you or a loved one are interested in playing Guild Wars 2, check the links down below and begin your adventure in Tyria today. See you in game!